Hello again, everybody. Tonight I'd like to recall President Harry Truman, 33rd President of the United States. Now, President Franklin D. Roosevelt served 4 terms. The only president to serve more than 2 terms. In any case, in his 4th term, he chose Harry Truman to be his vice president. And some months later, that was April 1945, FDR passed away, and Truman became president to fill out FDR's term. Now, the two of them were quite dissimilar. You might say Truman was a regular guy, the people's president. He could be your Uncle Harry. He could be Harry, a next-door neighbor. But he had a good heart. He had a good sense of humor. He was a officer in World War I. Now, I recall Harry Truman from the newsreels and from newspapers. We used to see him taking his Constitution, or his walk, his exercise through Washington, D.C., with the press trying to keep up to him. He kept a very brisk pace, and some of the older press had a hard time keeping up to him, but all the time asking him questions and him answering in his own certain way, as positive, like, I know, and here's what it's going. That sort of response. He was quite sure of himself. It was Harry Truman that had the sign on his desk, "The buck stops here." And if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. A typical example of Harry Truman was his daughter, Margaret, studied singing. She was a soprano, and she gave a number of recitals. Now, there was one critic, there was one critic who wrote unkindly of Margaret Truman's voice. I'm not going to read it, but what I will read is Harry Truman's response. Harry Truman wrote back to the critic, "I have never met you, but if I do, you'll need a new nose, plenty of beefsteak over your black eye, and perhaps a supporter below." Unquote, Harry Truman. Now, we don't want to make Harry Truman a caricature, because he took on some tremendous responsibilities, including nothing less than the atomic bomb, which needed authorization to be used, to be dropped. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were nuclear attacks near the end of World War II against the Empire of Japan by the United States at the order of U.S. President Harry Truman on August 6, 1945. The little boy was dropped on the city of Hiroshima, and the fat man was detonated over Nagasaki. Of course, there were great casualties, and it was tragic, of course. But a few days later, the Japanese surrendered, and World War II was over. You might say thanks to Harry Truman. Now, it's true there were very heavy casualties, but on the other hand, there would have been very heavy casualties on the Allied side, because we would have to invade Japan, if you can imagine such a thing. Just imagine the casualties that we would suffer. In any case, that's one example of the problems Harry Truman took on, resolved boldly, apparently without hesitation. And I've got here some other of his accomplishments. He helped found the United Nations. The Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe was Truman's and Marshall's idea. The Truman Doctrine to contain communism. And that, of course, was the beginning of the Cold War, where the United States decided to hold back communist advance. The creation of NATO and repulsing of the Koreans who were trying to take over all of Korea. Now, of course, when you think of Harry Truman, you also think of the election in Iran, was it 1948? When everybody picked Thomas E. Dewey to win. And the next morning, some papers came out that Dewey was elected. And that turned out to be one of the biggest mistakes the press ever made, because it was Harry Truman who was reelected. Now,